July 26, 1944, 11:50 hours. Lechfeld Air Base, Bavaria. Oberleutnant Franz Wagner cinched the straps of his helmet, the smell of burnt kerosene and new leather filling his nostrils. At 25, he was an experte, a double ace with 82 victories against the Russians and Americans in his Focke-Wulf 190. But the FW-190 was a relic, a propeller-driven plow horse. Today he was strapping into a god. He was strapping into the Messerschmitt Me 262 Schwalbe, the Swallow. Beneath his feet, the concrete of the runway seemed to vibrate with a low, alien hum. This was not the familiar, coughing roar of a piston engine. It was a rising, shrieking whistle, the sound of the future. In his flight suit pocket, a letter from his mother in Cologne described the city as an ocean of rubble, the nights filled with the thunder of the Wehrmachts, the four-engined Allied bombers. Franz gripped the throttle. This machine was the answer. This was the Wunderwaffe, the wonder weapon that would sweep the skies clean. This was the Reich's retribution. His flight instructor, a grizzled veteran missing 2 fingers, had been blunt. "This is not a plane, Herr Leutnant. It is a bullet. It has no armor. It has no mercy. It has only speed. Your engine will burn out in 20 hours. Your guns will shred a B-17 in 2 seconds. You are untouchable. The Amerikaner have nothing that can even see you. Go. Show them what a god looks like." As the Jumo 004 turbine spooled up to a deafening scream, Franz felt a surge of pure, unadulterated arrogance. He was a new kind of knight riding a spear of fire. He had no idea that the secret he was guarding had already been stolen, and that his invincibility was a terrifying, short-lived illusion. The Me 262 was a weapon born of desperation and genius, a machine that should have changed the course of the air war. Its development began in 1938, but it was plagued by official indifference, technical hurdles, and Hitler's disastrous obsession with using it as a blitz bomber, a high-speed attack plane, rather than the pure interceptor its designers intended. By the time it was finally unleashed in mid-1944, the Luftwaffe was a shattered remnant of its former self, fighting a defensive war over its own homeland. But what a weapon it was. Its 2 Junkers Jumo 004 axial flow jet engines propelled it to a top speed of nearly 540 mph, 870 km/h. The fastest Allied prop-driven fighter, the P-51D Mustang, could barely touch 440 mph. This speed differential was not just an advantage. It was a revolution. The Me 262 could climb to 30,000 feet in under 7 minutes, far faster than any Allied aircraft. It was armed with 4 devastating 30mm Mk108 cannons in the nose, a concentration of firepower that could, as the instructor claimed, obliterate a B-17 Flying Fortress with a 1-second burst. The German tactics, developed by aces like Adolf Galland and Johannes Steinhoff, were built entirely around this godlike speed. The Me 262s would approach the massive Allied bomber streams from high astern, diving at a shallow angle to build up even more speed. They would slice through the formation, ignoring the escorting P-51s and Thunderbolts, who would appear to be hanging motionless in the sky. The Me 262 pilot had a closing speed of over 200 mph on the American fighters, making him impossible to intercept in a traditional dogfight. He would fire his cannons, then use his unmatchable speed to climb away, reposition, and attack again. On paper, it was an unbreakable system. It was the weapon that would win back the sky, and the Germans knew with absolute certainty that they were the only ones who possessed it. For Oberleutnant Franz Wagner, flying the Me 262 was a disorienting, exhilarating, and terrifying experience. The takeoff roll was the most dangerous part. The Jumo 004 engines were sluggish, slow to respond to the throttle. He had to nurse the plane into the air, praying that the notoriously unreliable turbines wouldn't ingest a piece of debris or simply burst into flames, a common occurrence. The engines had a service life, a time between overhaul, of just 10 to 25 hours. Every flight was a gamble, but once airborne, once the wheels were up and the throttle was past the 8,000 RPM mark, the machine was transformed. There was no propeller torque trying to twist the plane, no bone-jarring vibration from pistons. There was just a smooth, otherworldly whistle and a relentless, crushing acceleration that pinned him to his seat. He felt less like a pilot and more like an artillery shell. His first combat mission was a revelation. His Staffel squadron of 4 262s vectored towards a box of 300 B-17s. Below, he saw the little friends, the P-51 escorts, weaving protectively. They were irrelevant. Franz pushed the throttle forward. He accelerated to 530 mph, his aircraft streaking past the Mustangs as if they were tethered. He lined up on a B-17 at 800 yards, the bomber filling his gun sight. He pressed the firing stud. The 30mm cannons bucked, thump, 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 and the B-17's entire tail section simply disintegrated. He was through the formation in 4 seconds. He glanced back. The P-51s were turning, distant specks miles behind him, their pilots just now realizing what had happened. Franz laughed into his oxygen mask. It was true. He was untouchable. This single machine, he thought, would make his aces tally, his Abschussbalken, meaningless. This was not a fair fight. This was a slaughter. He and his fellow pilots were the new masters of the sky. Their confidence, their arrogance was absolute, built on a technological monopoly they believed was years ahead of anything the Allies could ever produce. The German high command was fatally wrong. Their monopoly was an illusion. The core of their jet secret had been stolen, not in 1944, but in 1939. In November 1939, a high-level anti-Nazi German scientist, Hans Ferdinand Mayer, wrote a detailed multi-page document outlining Germany's most advanced secret weapons programs. He anonymously posted it to the British Embassy in Oslo, Norway. This Oslo report was one of the greatest intelligence coups of the war. Tucked within its pages, alongside details on new radar systems and guided missiles, was a small explosive section. Item 8. Aircraft new engines. It described aircraft that bypassed the propeller, using a gas turbine for propulsion by reaction. It explicitly stated that the first experimental models were already flying. For British intelligence, this was the smoking gun. It confirmed that the rumors were true, and that the Germans were pouring state resources into jet propulsion. This theft of Germany's strategic direction was far more valuable than any blueprint. It immediately gave a new, frantic urgency to Britain's own fledgling jet program, which had been languishing with little funding. That program was led by a brilliant, stubborn RAF officer named Frank Whittle. Whittle, working independently, had patented his own design for a centrifugal flow jet engine in 1930. He was the parallel genius to Germany's Hans von Ohain. But now, with the Oslo report confirming a race was on, the British government threw its weight behind Whittle. In May 1941, 2 years before the Me-262 was ready, the British experimental Gloster E-2839, powered by Whittle's engine, took to the skies. By 1944, this stolen conceptual lead had borne fruit. The Gloster Meteor, Britain's first operational jet fighter, was already in production. While the Germans were building their invincible interceptor, the British were quietly building its twin. The Allies were not just expecting the German jets. They were preparing a lethal surprise of their own. The psychological shock of the revelation did not come from a high command briefing. It came as it always does to the man in the cockpit. August 29, 1944. 14:10 hours. Over Allied-held territory near Brussels, Franz Wagner was limping home. His attack on a B-24 formation had been a success. He'd downed another bomber, but a lucky shot from a tail gunner had punched a hole in his port engine. It was vibrating badly and he had to throttle it back. He was low, around 10,000 feet, and nervous. He was still fast, but he was vulnerable. He scanned the sky. He saw a speck at his 4 o'clock. A P-51, he assumed, foolishly trying to catch him. He prepared to add a little power and leave it in his wake. But the speck grew larger. Too quickly. It wasn't a Mustang. It wasn't a Spitfire. It was low-winged, with its engines mounted in pods on the wings. And it had no propellers. Franz's blood ran cold. His mind simply could not process what he was seeing. It was a phantom, an impossibility. The aircraft, sleek and yellow-nosed, slid up beside him, just out of gun range. It was a Gloster Meteor from No. 616 Squadron, on patrol for V-1 flying bombs. The British pilot, Flying Officer Dixie Dean, was equally stunned. RAF High Command had forbidden them from crossing into German territory, precisely to prevent a German pilot from seeing what Franz was seeing right now. For a long, agonizing 30 seconds, the two jets flew in parallel. Two sharks who had just discovered they were not the only predators in the ocean. Franz stared at the British roundel, at the smooth propellerless nose. The British pilot stared back. They were the two most advanced human beings on the planet, locked in a silent, terrifying moment of mutual realization. The secret was out. They have it too. The Meteor, its pilot obeying strict orders, peeled off and dove away. Franz flew on. his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the stick. The hole in his engine didn't matter. The successful mission didn't matter. All that mattered was the image of that impossible aircraft. The Wunderwaffe was not a miracle. It was not unique. And the arrogance he had felt just an hour before evaporated, replaced by a cold, bottomless terror. The news that the Allies had a jet sent a shockwave through the Luftwaffe leadership, but the truth was even worse. The stolen secret, the Oslo report, had spurred the Allies, but their solution was fundamentally different and, in a crucial way, far superior. The German Me-262 used axial flow, JUMO-04 engines. This design passed air straight through the engine, using multiple stages of compressor fans. It was theoretically more powerful and efficient, the clear future of jet technology, but it required complex, high-temperature resistant wonder alloys, chromium, molybdenum, nickel, materials that the blockaded, bombed-out Third Reich simply did not have. As a result, the JUMO-04s were a mechanical nightmare, built with substandard alloys. They were prone to catastrophic failure and had a lifespan of barely 10-25 hours. The British Gloster Meteor, by contrast, used Frank Whittle's centrifugal flow, Rolls-Royce Welland engine. This design used a large single impeller to sling air outwards like a water pump. It was bulkier and less efficient than the German design, but it had one towering advantage. It could be built from existing, simple, reliable steel alloys. The Welland engine was robust. It could run for 150 hours or more without a major overhaul. The unexpected outcome was this. The Germans had built a technologically superior thoroughbred that was too fragile to fight. The Allies, by understanding the core principle, had built a workhorse that was reliable, could be mass-produced, and could be flown by average pilots. The German pilot, like Franz, now had to contend with the fact that his miracle weapon was a death trap, while the enemy, with their endless resources, had a good enough jet that actually worked. The terror that gripped Franz Wegener and his fellow jet pilots was not the fear of a fair fight. It was the psychological collapse of their last hope. The Me-262 was meant to be the ace in the hole, the weapon that would finally turn the tide. The realization that the Allies had matched their secret meant that the tide would never turn. The war was, with mathematical certainty, lost. The confidence of the Expert 10 shattered. They were now flying a desperate race against their own machines. Every pilot knew that an engine fire was more likely to kill him than a P-51. The Me-262, once a symbol of hope, became a symbol of betrayal. It was a hollow promise. While the Allies had jets and total numerical superiority and reliable piston engine fighters and an ocean of fuel, the Luftwaffe had a handful of fragile, irreplaceable jets that were burning out faster than they could be built. This terror was compounded by new Allied tactics. P-51 pilots, now fully briefed on the Me-262, stopped trying to dogfight it. Instead, they stalked the jet airfields. They would wait, circling at 20,000 feet, and then dive on the Me-262s during their most vulnerable moments. The long, slow takeoff run, or the agonizingly slow, powerless landing approach. The hunter had become the hunted. The invincible jet pilots were now sitting ducks for the obsolete propeller planes, their greatest fear no longer the enemy in the sky, but the silence of their own engines. The Me-262 and the Gloster Meteor, the world's first operational jet fighters, rarely met in combat. The war was decided long before they could have a meaningful impact. The Me-262, despite its technological leap, was a strategic failure. It was too little, too late, and too unreliable. The true masters of the sky in 1944 and 1945 were not the jets, but the swarms of P-51 Mustangs that destroyed the Luftwaffe on the ground, in their factories, and by starving them of fuel. The stolen secret of 1939, the Oslo report, had served its purpose. It had kicked off the arms race, ensuring the Allies were not caught by surprise. But the final, most comprehensive theft came after Germany's surrender. In the ruins of the Third Reich, Allied T-forces fanned out in operations codenamed Lusty and Paperclip. They seized everything: blueprints, engine parts, wind tunnel data, and most importantly, the German scientists themselves. Hans von Ohain, the German father of the jet engine, was taken to America. Werner von Braun, the V-2 rocket scientist, was captured. All the hard-won, bloody secrets of German engineering, which pilots like Franz Wegener had flown and died for, were packed into crates and shipped to the United States and the Soviet Union. This was the true theft. The Germans had invented the future, but they would not be allowed to own it. The technologies that were supposed to save the Third Reich would instead become the foundation of the Cold War, powering the next generation of American and Soviet fighters that would one day face each other in the skies over Korea.